Aloha, and welcome to another episode of the Groundswell Podcast, where I connect you to outstanding humans and sustainable ideas. I'm your host, Scott Martin. And today we have Robert Rose, who is a legend in the content marketing space. He just recently published a book called Strategic Content Marketing. He's published multiple other books. He's co-founded, I think, and head of the Content Marketing Institute, the Content Advisory. I mean, anything content marketing, this guy's got his brain around, and is one of the leading experts on the topic. So without further ado, let's paddle in. All right, welcome back to another episode of the Groundswell Origins Podcast. I have the one and only Robert Rose. Welcome.
Well, thank you so much, my friend. Yeah. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
You know, I want to jump right in. I mean, you've written multitude of books in category of content marketing. You're like Jedi. You've got a new book out. It's not even out yet. Tell us a little bit about your new book. Let's just jump right into it.
Sure. Well, thank you very much for asking. It's funny how that works out. I mean, by multitude, if you mean four, this is my fourth. And interestingly enough, the first one on my own, and it's ultimately, and to your point, most all of them have been on the topic of content strategy or content marketing in some form or fashion. And really what I wanted to do was, I've been teaching and I've been consulting for the last decade on this and working with brands all over the world about this. And so what I've noticed is that, does the world need another book about content marketing? No, probably not. But what I've really seen is that most of the books, 99%, including the ones that I've written, have all been about the first two words, right? Either content or marketing. And there hasn't really been a book on strategy. And by strategy, what I mean is the classic Michael Porter definition of strategy, which is the differentiated activities that we fit together in a business to actually create competitive advantage. And so that idea hadn't really existed before. And it is what I see being the true difference between those companies that consciously design something. In other words, they consciously say, we're going to create a content marketing approach. And there's plenty of companies and examples, and we can certainly talk about them. But then there are unconscious companies, the companies like Amazon or Lego, or those companies that they just became media operations as a means of optimizing their business. And so they didn't listen to Content Marketing Institute. They didn't read my books or anything like that. But I wanted to say, what are the commonalities that those two kinds of companies have in the way that they organize their people, their processes, their infrastructure to give them that competitive advantage?
So when you're looking at building a content strategy from the top down, sort of like from up above, and I'm a listener listening to this, when you say strategy, does that mean it sounds like you're building by design, not by default. You're not
Sure.
just fumbling around. But what are some sort of the key indicators that you're actually building a strategy? Like, is there a process, a step, a hierarchy? What is the thinking around how somebody approaches this?
Yeah, well, and in the book I talk about a 3-pillar sort of framework for it that maybe a little overly formal for the whole thing, but there is a framework to look at it, and the 3 pillars that I look at in the book are: one, what we call content as coordination. In other words, so as I've said many times, too many bumper stickery, sort of Twittery sort of ideas is that in most organizations, content is not a function in the business, right? Content is sort of everybody's job and nobody's strategy. And 90% of a great content strategy has nothing to do with the actual words, the video, the audio, the pictures that we create. It is the coordination, the communication of working together and collaborating and speaking as an institution or speaking as a business, not just a bunch of individuals out there doing that. So that's the first pillar, is sort of how do we coordinate everybody together and work together as to have a voice as a business. Then the second, which is all the way to the third pillar, really, which is the experiences that we create. So the pillar of the containers that we create, whether that's a blog or a resource center or a PDF file or a website, having goals, objectives, and ultimately a set of activities that treats those things as important as the products and services we put into the marketplace is important. As I often say to clients, look, if your blog isn't as important as one of your products or services, that's arguably, you should ask yourself why you even have it. those communication vehicles, those experiences need to be as important as everything we do. So assigning a product manager to them and assigning an audience development manager to them and making them a real part of our outgoing effort. And then the third is operations, which is bridging those two things, the coordinated set of creating the content and the experiences by which audiences will consume them. There is an operation there, and we call it the frame, right? Which is both the technology, but also the guidelines, the standards, the playbooks, the ways that content flows through the business has to be standardized. And so, with those three things as pressure points, we can start to say, hey, where are we weak? Where do we not have the right skill sets? Where do we not have the right activities formalized? Where do we not have the right people working on and collaborating together to create a set of activities? Again, as Michael Porter would define it, as a strategy, as a formal strategy of how we actually apply strategic content.
Wow. Okay, so this is really interesting. This wasn't what I was expecting as an answer. This is differentiated because a lot of when people talk about content strategy, the first place they go to is how do we activate content? How do we reach our audience? It's all outward facing, and you're starting inward facing first, if I'm understanding you correctly. Is that correct?
100%. Yeah, it's all about, how do we start, you know, one of the things that I often get when I talk to clients is, okay, content is too big a word, right? That's just it. What do you mean by that? Like, how can we actually get strategic about everything we do, right? It's, there's the wonderful David Foster Wallace, the wonderful author, poet, writer. He said, once he told the story about the two fish swimming along in the, and they meet a third fish, and the third fish goes, hello boys, how's the water today? And they swim on for a while, sort of confused, and then one fish turns to the other and says, what the hell is water? Right? They just have no concept of this thing that's around them every single day. And that's businesses with content. It's this thing that we swim in every single day. It's everything that we do. And yet we don't have a strategic process around it. We don't actually look at it like a collaborative process to give ourselves a single voice, our business a single voice. That is something that media companies understand. So when we say we want to act more like media companies, it isn't like we want to market more like media companies and activate content more like media companies. It is that we need to operate as a media company would, treating content and our voice as the strategic asset that it actually is. And in order to do that, we have to have the right collaborative approach to communication, because ultimately content equals communication. It is everything that the business communicates. So it is, yes, starting from the foundation of how do we communicate as a business, and then starting to say, great, now what are all the valuable ways we can communicate as a business?
So, in your experience of, so there's one thing is like the way you're describing this, and then there's the chasm of someone listening going, okay, great, I totally want, I'm subscribing to doing this. How does one get buy-in at the executive level to move away from focusing on why aren't we focusing on how many hits we get on YouTube? Why are we focusing on this first? How do you help someone get buy-in at the executive level to this process?
It's a great question, and the answer is very carefully,
Right,
because
because it's really counterintuitive, right? Like
it
that's
really is. Well, here's the thing: what ends up happening is, and I talk a little bit about this in the book, which is, content strategy is a classic what they call wicked problem, and by wicked problem, what I mean, there is a social and political for civic development, and they're called wicked problems. And wicked problems are basically those problems that can't be solved until you actually try to solve them. And what's meant by that is that you can't really see them as challenges or problems until you actually try and fix it. The example I use all the time is like my wife and I. My wife and I love to cook, right? And so we get into our kitchen and we've got a pattern, and we go and we make stuff and we make, blah blah blah, and it works. It works okay for us, right? We have a friend come over and try and cook with us and make dinner with us, and she's completely like, she's looking for cutlery in the dishwasher. She's looking for, she all sorts of issues. And she looks at us and goes, you guys are completely unorganized. You're completely disorganized. This could be optimized so much better. And we look at it and go, is that a problem? I mean, it works for us. And she goes, yeah, it's a problem. And so when she starts to point some stuff out, like where stuff should be, Well, we go, yeah, you're right. This is actually an issue. That's the classic definition of a wicked problem. So when you go to your CEO or you go to your business leader and you go, hey, we have a problem with content, the usual response is something to the effect of, well, is content getting created? Well, yeah. And is it engaging people? Well, some of it, yeah. Well, what's the problem? And so the problem is, of course, that everybody's doing it on their own. There is no coordinated strategy. Thus, our amazing blog is getting fed into a extremely poor sales enablement process, which is getting fed into an extremely poor customer service content experience. And we have no coordination between those things. And so ultimately, everything seems a little mediocre or everything seems a little average, or we sort of just go, it's going to be what it's going to be. And so we never really get to the process of trying to fix it. How do you do that? Well, one of the things that you have to do is start to really look at what's going on from from the process perspective, how content gets created, from whether it's content marketing or any marketing content, quite honestly, and start to say, how are we doing, right? Really understand, how are we doing? Are we differentiated with these activities, or are we just swimming in the water, right? And so ultimately, when you point that out to leadership and you say, it's not the content we're creating. Content we're creating is great. We're no shortage of creative ideas and we've got good stuff, but we can't scale and we can't measure and we can't create great, smooth processes. And until we fix ultimately our foundation, we'll never be able to do any of those things.
Right. So one aspect of the strategy is the container of, how is content sourced, managed, and stored, which means it's ultimately how is it able to be accessed. Like, is that what you're
Exactly.
talking about? Because I know a lot of times when I'm coming into an organization and they've got content, they're creating content, but they're just like spewing it over, it's like a kitchen that's a mess. And you're like,
That's
I'm
right.
trying to make a recipe, and I'm like, I don't even know where the fucking spices are.
That's right. That's right. It's literally throwing spaghetti against the wall and seeing what will stick, right? Here's the classic example of this, and this is more of a B2B example than a B2C example, but the similar sort of correlation is in both, which is you get somebody calling up and saying, so the content people create an amazing white paper, right? They create this amazing thought leadership thing, and they publish it out, and it's on the website, et cetera. Sales person gets a call from a prospect and says, I just got this amazing white paper from your website, and I just want to ask a few questions about it because it's really great. And the salesperson goes, I got no idea what you're talking about, because they don't know. They've not been made aware. If they've been made aware, they're dumb. Well, now you've done two things. You've, one, ruined that relationship with that salesperson, with that prospect forever, because if it's even possible, they've provided negative value. I mean, basically by saying, I don't even know what our business is talking about. And two, you've devalued that piece of content that you created, because the business isn't even aware that it actually said the thing. And so the way that needs to go is that the prospect calls the salesperson and says, hey, I just got this amazing white paper off your website. I'd like to ask a few questions. And the salesperson needs to go, well, did you do the thing on page 17 when it said to do the ROI calculator, and you did the thing later? And did you do? Yeah, I did. Great. You know what? I'm going to send you the content team has just told me about this other piece that we have. I'm going to send that. Can I subscribe you to our email newsletter? Because I think it's going to, that's the conversation that needs to happen. And that only happens when we have a coordinated strategy around the way that we present content. It has to be a business strategy. Otherwise, we're all just saying stuff, right? And how many times does the brand team and the demand gen team and the sales team, they're all competing with various parts of the customer's journey for attention? I mean, I talked to one company 2 years ago where they said, we can't even get a link to our blog on the website because the web team thinks that that'll funnel traffic away from the website, therefore creating a competing property. And so we can't even get them to link to our blog on the website. I mean, that's the crazy stuff that's happening in business right now with the way that they create these content experiences.
So how do you create a hierarchy or a coordinated effort that both sides are battling for content? And I remember doing an interview with, I can't remember who it was, but it was like about sales. And they said the most important aspect of sales is a little bit like what you're describing, which is being inward, which is everybody needs to be able to map the relationship to the sale. So
Yeah.
you're saying the same thing with content to a degree. and who wins in terms of like who decides the journey path of content?
It's a great question. And the answer is, and I don't mean to be snarky with this, but the answer is somebody, right? I mean, that's the problem. It isn't that a decision has been made that's wrong. In most businesses, no decision has been made.
Oh
And so
yeah.
what ends up happening is that everybody just fills the void with their own interpretation of what's going on. So what happens is that sales then goes, yeah, these white papers that the content or the marketing team are sending over, they're crap because I don't understand them and I'm getting questions about them that I can't answer. So therefore, you know what? Just give me another brochure. Just give me something that I know works, because that's what I really want to do. And then the marketing team thinks, we create all this content and sales never uses it. And it's that sort of that siloed nature that we, so classically think about between sales, marketing, comms, the C-suite, between how marketing is siloed off from everything, and sort of marketing's off doing crazy stuff. We don't even understand what they're doing. That culture emerges from that inability to make a decision about how, when, where, and what should the business be talking about.
So in a lot of ways, this is a culture strategy in some ways, because
Totally.
if you think of reluctant compliance, right? Like, okay, sure,
Yeah.
you inform the teams, but how do you get buy-in across the organization where people are somewhat apathetic or in a competitive stance against an internal group, or even going, there's like sometimes, like I'm working with a client right now, we have a bit of a siloed sort of content strategy that's
Yeah.
meant to it's intentionally meant to be somewhat not connected, so
Sure.
that it's the example is it's a retailer for motorsports, and we're creating a show that we actually want to engage to create a community. We don't want to be too closely tied to it because we want to engage other brands and other people, or even our competitors, into this show. And so we're trying to like I'm trying to figure out like how to actually like we do the weaving of this, right? Like you can see there's a little
It's
bit of complexity with content.
No, it's great. Well, that's exactly it. And it sounds like you've got, the core elements of a great content marketing strategy in place for that particular initiative, right? It has a goal, it has an objective, and the business, the institution, the business has acknowledged that it's going to be a separate initiative, right? It's going to be a separate initiative meant to drive separate goals, right? And let's hope that those goals and objectives are aligned with everybody and communicated to everybody to say, when it does this, when it does whatever that show is supposed to do, that spells success. And what it doesn't do is ultimately not provide for goals that are assumed that it's going to do. That's what happens so often in these situations is, yeah, marketing goes off and creates an amazing podcast or creates a cool show, et cetera, et cetera. And sales goes, great, we're going to get a bunch of leads from this. And they're like, no, that's not what this content is really built to do. It's built to drive brand awareness, or it's built to drive, customer loyalty, or it's built to drive some other part of the expansion or adding wealth to the business, but it's not supposed to drive leads. And when it doesn't, sales starts going, well, why are we doing a podcast? I don't care about that. And so it's not just the one off, right? It's absolutely communicating the entire ecosystem of content that we're creating so that everybody understands. And this is why that experiences pillar is so important. Each of those experiences has a charter, a goal, objectives, a business budget, a promotional budget, an activation budget. It has people, it has a product manager, it has all of the things that require to become an important initiative for our business strategy. And that just doesn't exist in most businesses.
Interesting. Now, how do you navigate a content strategy where at the C-suite or the people are at the table going, how do we map this to sales? And in some cases,
Yeah,
you could argue it's indirectly. How do you then either justify it, or how is there creative ways that it all connects to sales in some way?
totally. Yeah, absolutely. And I have a whole chapter on measurement in the book where I talk about, there are two things that leadership cares about, right? There are only two, right? Make more money, save more money. That's it. Costs and revenue. That's the only thing the leadership really cares about. And so if you break that down, content can contribute to both in sort of indirect and direct ways, right? So the most common is indirect savings, right? In other words, thinking about how do we make marketing more efficient, right? So in other words, I say my content marketing is going to provide less expensive leads, or it's going to provide less expensive attention, right, than paid media, right, organic SEO or whatever is going to create less expensive attention, less expensive leads, less expensive customer acquisition. It's indirect savings to the marketing efforts, broadly speaking. But it may also provide direct savings. In other words, it may just completely eradicate some of the things that we're doing, such as paid media, right? So it may eradicate the idea that, you know what, we don't need to advertise on this channel anymore because we've created a viable owned media channel that is just as good as the advertising we were getting off of, spending money on that magazine. We've launched our own magazine. Or it can provide indirect revenue, or so on the other side, which is, do customers buy more that come through content marketing? Do they stay longer? Do they subscribe longer? Do they evangelize more? Do they give us a higher net promoter score? There are all those things. And ultimately, all that comes down to is your measurement strategy, and looking at it is, what do those audiences, what do those people that come through content marketing do? What are their actions? What is the impact that the content has that's different than our other marketing methods, right? How is it different than advertising? How is it different than PR comms? How is it different than events that we pay for? How is it different than direct cold calling sales? And all of those things play into that's and it's such an important reason why it has to be integrated into the overall business. Because if it isn't, then we're just comparing it, right? Then we're just saying, well, yeah, it's providing great, we get a bunch of subscribers, but they don't do anything. Well, we got to do something with them. I mean, that's the whole point.
Beautiful. And it's like, if I think about content, and a lot of times they're weighing out like paid versus like the journey of content marketing. In this strategy or in your book, do you cover sort of like the strategic decision between the activation or the patience required, or what do you talk about that? Because I think a lot of, like, what gets mixed up is the impatience of, okay, well, this should be working, and we should be getting this many leads, or we should be getting this much traffic. Like, how do you prepare a business to really understand the path, or can you?
That's such a great question, because it is the place where so many businesses get tripped up, which is look, a when we think about content marketing it is a long-term strategy, right? It is a value-based strategy. It is about building ultimately owned media that engage and monetizes an audience. And so inherent in that is that, and this again comes back to the experiences pillar, is that the owned media that we're creating, that's creating and ultimately enabling those audiences to become monetized, well, very much like a product, very much like any product we would introduce into the marketplace, takes time to build. In other words, it takes time to get market share. It takes time to get, and it requires, by the way, all the requisite things that we would do with a product. It requires a activation budget. It requires ongoing management. It requires ongoing care, feeding, et cetera. And so when a CEO says, I want a content marketing program that'll pay dividends in the next 4 weeks, I'd say, no, you should go out and do an ad campaign, or you should do a direct mail campaign, or you should hold an event, a webinar or something like that, or, do some sort of, event stunt, if you're in retail kind of thing. That's a short-term triage, day trading type of, activity that marketing can get a return on in a small amount of time. You pay for speed. And so the idea is that some portion of your budget goes to your long-term strategy that you're building, because ultimately the real value of content marketing is like a flywheel. Yes, it does take a significant investment up front, but as you start to build it and build it and build it, it pays exponential dividends down the road. So it literally is almost like putting solar panels on the roof of your house, right? Yeah, it's tough. You got to put them on the roof, and you got to pay, and you got to do all those things, but over time it's going to pay you back, and it's actually going to pay you back in a way that starts to really just, print money for you. So it's having the patience to be able to do that. And so I almost always recommend, I don't think content marketing should be your entire strategy, but it should be as the significant amount of it that you can afford as a long-term part of your value portfolio of marketing.
Complete answer. It was phenomenal. And I just want to just check in that you can hear me okay?
Yeah, you're all
Okay,
good.
I just
Yeah,
got an
yeah.
alert. One of the things that I've noticed is businesses, they're stepping over dollars to pick up pennies in terms of content. They don't recognize
Yeah,
that there's
yeah,
content all around them, and like the content of like, I think of like a restaurant, right? Back in
yeah.
the day, the restaurant, the people are cooking, they were in the back. And then someone had the great idea of putting glass and then bringing them part of the experience. And that was like a form of marketing. And I try to relate that to businesses, like the process and different things. What could you say in terms of this strategy, this internal? Is there a portion of it that you talk about, or you could shed light on, of really unearthing the true value of the organization's content and sourcing it?
That's a wonderful question, and I love that metaphor. It's such a great question, and if I'm understanding it well enough, I think the real answer to that is what we see is sort of a balance. In other words, do you want to let them see you making the sausage? And in some restaurants, that's a great, wonderful thing. In other restaurants, you may not want to watch the cooks make how they're, in a sushi restaurant, you definitely want that. You definitely want to watch the artists at work, right, and see what they're doing. But in some other restaurants, you just may not want to see everything going on behind the scenes. And so I see a lot of companies that are really successful with this surfacing their sort of operation like a media company and making a thing out of it. And the one that's coming leaping to mind right now is Cleveland Clinic. Their the way they do their blog, which is Health Essentials, and their health library, which is literally called the Health Library, which now get tens of millions of global views, and by the way, now funds the entirety of marketing for Cleveland Clinic, right? Because of the revenue that they get from advertising on the blog and advertising in Health Library, now funds the entirety of marketing and creation of content for everything from keeping up the website to doing media to doing all the things. And there are no secrets about that, right? They are fully out there saying, yes, we are a media division, we are out there doing stuff. Here's what this is the way we do things. And they're showing you how they're cooking the meals, right? And that's full transparency. And you can think about it from a healthcare perspective, it probably makes the best sense for them to do that. Others I've seen really fall on their face because of their brand, for example. Great example of this is, AB InBev bought at one point, I think this was 4 or 5 years ago, they bought a microbrew review site. And the first thing they did was they made big hay with it, right? They said, "Hey, we just bought this big microbrew review site, and it's amazing, and we're going to take it over, and it's going to be awesome, and you're going to be able to get reviews of your favorite microbrews on this wonderful website." And of course, the audience for that microbrew review site went, "No, you're a huge corporate alcohol beverage maker. I don't want the man coming in here and telling me, this is, of course, it's got all sorts of corporate slant to it, and they've lost a bunch of subscribers." So they actually made it too transparent, and they went too fast into the, hey, this is a cool marketing tool for us, and didn't do it the right way. So it's really a balance, and an artistic balance at that, about how you actually approach those things.
That's amazing. And I look at content and the surge of this new desire for people to create community within a business, and
Hmm.
where do you see the connection as part of the strategy, because it's very internal, of either fostering, building, encouraging, and the connection with community in content?
Community is huge these days, right? I mean, it is becoming so, we used to talk a lot about audience building, and still do to a great degree in content marketing circles, about building an audience, building and community, especially in B2C and consumer packaged goods, has become such an important piece of what's going on there. And it was, I think it's Chris Brogan, who I always credit him, although I'm not sure it was actually him who coined it, but I'm going to credit him anyway, who said basically the difference between an audience and community is which way the chairs are facing. And
Mm.
so it's a great strategy as long as you're willing to go neck deep into it, right? So community is great And again, as long as that community becomes as important as one of your products, one of your services, and you put the requisite, when companies fail with community, it's because they see it as sort of well, it's just a customer service ploy, or it's just a way to create a better, how to for customers. And so it's just going to be a library of how to stuff. And we're going to man it with people who can answer questions from people who are having problems. That's not a community. That's just literally a customer service library. And so you really have to lean into what does that community mean to you as a company, and how are you co-creating, because that's ultimately the definition. How are you co-creating answers, better experiences, and wonderful with that community? And so it's getting into a partnership with your customers.
And how do you, like, if you're creating a strategy as an organization, there's a little bit of fear there because you don't have as much control.
Sure, of
How
course.
do you
Yeah.
how do you either shape that or create a strategy internally to go, we need to let go of this? Like, I mean, which of the two, or how does it work?
Yeah, and it's tough, and it's brand dependent, right? I mean, because there's a lot of, in other words, if you're a brand like Apple, you're not interested in that, right? You're not interested in what, really customers are going to co-create when it comes to new products and services. It's very top down. It's very sort of like, we are the artists and we will create what we're going to create and you're going to love it. But if you're a brand like Lego, for example, you're going to lean into that idea, that creativity, and that the kids have the best ideas and that their customers will have the best ideas. So they're going to create experiences like they did, where you can go in and literally pitch products. You can literally go in and, sort of help pitch and shape the future of new products through their communities. And if enough people vote on your product, well, they'll build it. And so it really is brand dependent. And you have to sort of be able to ask yourself, as a brand, as a business, do we want to co-create ultimately solutions with our customers and have them be a part of it, and ultimately give them credit for that as well?
Hmm. What about competitors? Like, in having a bigger community, like in the case of where somebody is going, we're a brand, but we want to create a community. And where do you draw the line between, like, where you could actually, like, co-opetition, if you will? Like, where do you see that as a strategy, or do you ever
I
talk about
do.
that?
Yeah, I do. And we do talk to a lot with brands about this, especially where you're competing for an audience, but not necessarily in sense of your products and services. And a great
What
example.
if you're even competing with products and services? Would you?
Yeah, you could. You could. Again, it depends on the brand, and it depends on the company strategy and the sort of competitive marketplace. We've seen some examples of that where competitors have worked together to create to sort of lift the tides of all the boats, as it were, sort
Mhm.
of building an awareness around an industry, or building an awareness around a particular point of view around the future of something. Arguably, you can say that's a little bit of what's going on in AI right now, and as a growth industry, right? So you've got a lot of little companies coming up and emerging as AI, sort of chat GPT, sort of, technology companies. And you can argue that they're all basically helping each other by sort of making everybody aware of the power of AI and generative
Mhm.
AI and all the things that they're doing. There's some of that going on there. It gets, obviously with competitors, it gets funky fast, right? It gets really weird really fast. And so we more often see the latter, which is when we think of, the co-opetition. It's when we're competing for the same eyeballs, but we're not necessarily competing with the same products and services.
Interesting. Okay, that's a really great point. Now, when I think of content marketing, when I've been at the table of helping people with their growth strategy and look at
Yeah.
one area of business in this, and I was curious if your book covers this, or if you have some insight, which I know you do, is the difference between, there's business performance and there's brand value combined together. We're looking at, if they want to do an exit, how does content marketing? I think it has a potential inflection of incredible value for creating higher valuation. Do you have some thoughts around
Oh,
that?
yeah. Yeah. I mean, my friend Joe and I wrote a whole book on that particular topic called Killing Marketing a couple of years ago. Um, you know, I'm surprised that it hasn't happened yet. I'll put it that way. In terms of some of the value that's getting created, especially in high growth companies, um, where we're not seeing the valuation of the content platforms as a piece of that. And I'll give you a very specific example of this, which is Salesforce, right? So Salesforce, their Dreamforce event. despite, by the way, the disruptions of COVID and everything else that's happened over the last couple of years. So now is back up into the hundreds of thousands of people who invade, San Francisco every year. And sort of, it is the biggest software tech event on the planet, right? It is the biggest, one of the biggest technology events on the planet, and people pay to go, right? So it is a revenue generator, both from a sponsorship standpoint. And now they've transformed that, of course, into Salesforce Plus, which, of course, is the streaming network that they now have, which features talks from Dreamforce, all the thought leaders from Dreamforce, as well as syndicated shows that they've now purchased right to, and including, the Pivot podcast and so many others. So it is a content media platform that is a revenue generating piece of the business. If you just do the basic math of the number of attendees by average sales price of a ticket, plus the number of vendors that go, it is easily in the hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue. That means as a separate media company, just Dreamforce is probably valued in the low billions of dollars in terms of what it just alone as a business would do. How does that not affect the stock price, or how does that not affect the valuation of Salesforce as an asset to the company? And you don't see it very often. But of course, at the non-tectonic version of that, right, a small business, et cetera, you can actually see it happening there as well, right? So you look at a company like Terminus, right, the wonderful account-based marketing technology company, startup, Sangram Barjay, who ran that company for a good amount of time. They built an entire platform, a content, an event, a blog, a media platform around the Flip My Funnel brand, and basically built an entire content platform, so much so that the actual venture fund came in and said, let's split this company into two. Let's actually have a media company called Flip My Funnel, and then the software company called Terminus. So it's possible. It absolutely is possible in there, but it's still one of those things that CFOs are trying to get their head wrapped around.
And to me, those are such great examples. The one area that I'm seeing, anyways, as a strategy that's shoring up into the business valuation change is subscription model. So
Yeah.
when you can shift into person, and I find content and subscription model, they're like really close friends. It's like fucking peanut butter and jelly, man. Like, what's your thoughts there?
Yeah, well, that's our, that's the hill we'll die on, right? Which is the subscription model, which is the key with the subscription model is, so I grew up in that business, right? I started my career in TV, but beyond that, in the software business, I started my career as a CMO, of one of the OGs of software as a service back in 2001. And it was all about subscription, right? It was all about the power of the software as a service model and subscription. And of course, that has become sort of the ARR, MRR sort of is the sort of that's the Bible today. Sort of the holy commandments, as it were. And so when you look at content marketing, that's the model, right? That is exactly the model. As we were talking about earlier in the show, we talked about the flywheel effect of content marketing and how it becomes more valuable over time, and what happens with subscribed audiences. Because remember, subscribed audiences aren't gated audiences, right? It's not that you've gated some piece of content and created a transaction. A subscription is actually a commitment to future value. In other words, they didn't get value. Then maybe they got value out of the thing that you gave them the subscription for, that white paper, that thing, that, cool little, quiz or whatever it is you gave them value to. But what they're subscribing to is the promise of future value from you down the road. And that's how you keep subscribers, is that you keep promising future value that they go, yeah, I'm going to stay subscribed to this thing. And so from a marketing perspective, what that does is that value increases in time. The longer you keep a subscriber engaged, well, the more valuable they become. In other words, the more they'll evangelize your product, the more they'll buy, the more they'll stay, they'll stay customers longer, they'll become more loyal to your brand, they'll do more things that are in your favor. And because they're subscribed, it becomes easier to reach them. That's the real value when you look at somebody unconscious, like we talked about in the very beginning, like in Amazon, right? Why does Amazon spend $15 billion a year on content when Amazon Prime Video produces maybe $2 billion of revenue. I mean, that business doesn't work. It just doesn't work. But what they know is that by creating Amazon Prime viewers, and they know who those people are, well, they spend 2 to 3 times as much on products and services through their Amazon Prime membership. So for them, it's totally a loyalty play, right? It's totally an upsell, cross-sell play, because they know if I can get you as an Amazon Prime Video viewer, you're going to spend more money with Amazon, 2 to 3 times as much per year. And so that's the real key here, is that we're creating a group of people that we get to reach when we want to. We're not depending on an algorithm to do that. We get to reach those people, and they become more valuable over time.
That was like masterclass in explanation. Love it. So one of the challenges that I see repeatedly. So there's a repeat pattern I see pervasively in the industry, which is I have an audience, but I want to then cross the chasm. It feels like, using
Yeah,
Jeffrey Moore's crossing the chasm
sure.
into creating a subscriber base. What are the strategies that you would have, or when's the indication? What are the processes, or how do you want to think about it to bridge this?
That's a big question. There's a
It
lot to
is.
unpack there. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. So I won't try and unpack it all, to be honest, because it would that would literally be an hour show on its own.
Okay. Maybe we'll cut
But
you
we,
back for a second with just on that.
yeah, well, here's what I'll say to it though: is look, it starts with having a true objective, right? I mean, it goes all the way back to what we talked about at the very beginning of the show, which is most businesses don't really even understand the first step of that, right? Which is to create a common objective. And I'll give you an example, which is thinking about gating content, right? So the content marketing people are, yelling that we should never gate content. It should all be free, SEO, free content, blah, blah, blah. And the salespeople are saying, no, 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 we need to gate content because it needs to be protected. Well, somebody's wrong and somebody's right. But of course, they're both wrong and they're both right. The key is having an objective for both. So understanding that when we're trying to build an audience, we're not trying to move a customer. In other words, we have two goals as marketers. One, we can stop them purposely on their journey so that we can deliver value through thought leadership, entertainment, engagement, community, whatever that thing is. Stop them purposely, create friction on the journey so that they go, oh, they actually do consider us more deeply. They consider us more valuable. We're stopping them purposely. Or are we trying to hustle them along the pay line to put more in their shopping cart, to actually get them to purchase now, to do those things? Two very distinct objectives with a particular person that we're speaking with, both of them marketing goals. And so just really stopping for a moment to say, with this blog, with this podcast, with this, whatever it is we're building with this experience, what are we trying to do? Are we trying to, because most businesses, by the way, try to do both. And that's when they really get into trouble. Is, yeah, I want to create leads, but I also want to create subscribers. So we'll basically create anybody who registers for our resource center. Well, now they're a lead. And so they start getting pounded by sales calls. And of course, that turns people off and you're done. So really just understanding from the beginning what it is we're trying to do. Are you trying to build an audience or move an audience? And either one of those is great, but just being really conscious with everybody about what this experience is trying to do. Very much like you said with the show that you're creating for that retailer, it sounds very much like, to me, you're building an audience there. You're not trying to get somebody to buy now with this thing, right? You're trying to build an audience that ultimately will become a pool of people that you can go, hey, I know we just created this wonderful value with you for the show. Maybe you might consider something that we have to offer there, right? And so having an ability to reach those subscribers and possibly throw an offer over the wall is a good thing.
It's funny you would say build, move. My four steps in my book is build, move, change, transform in terms
Perfect.
of
I
the
love that.
audience.
I love that. That's exactly the right way to think about it, because that's the customer's journey in a nutshell, right?
It's exactly it. And the transform, see, that's the one thing I'm really interested about is Joe Pine. He's the author of Authenticity
I
is
love
Discovery.
Joe. Yeah, well, his book is amazing. Yeah,
He's
I
been
love
my
Joe.
mentor for my whole career, and I'm
Ah,
an experienced certified. And his real movement now is talking more about the progression of economic value and about transformation. And
yeah,
transformation being, experiences is where we're still there. time well spent, but transformation is when you're never the same again. And in my book, I talk about that's what builds this growth loop, the groundswell. Every person that's transformed is
Yep.
compelled to tell other people. How does content, market, building a strategy, how does content in your mind, I see it as being pivotal, but I'm curious like what your thoughts are in this whole journey of not just people think of content as consuming, but also time well spent. And what is your sort of like your overall thought of like transforming your audience, but with content, and it's different up here as an audience, just trying to connect with them versus transform them.
Yeah, and I love that word. I mean, I love that word is so wonderful. Um, you know, and by the way, it applies across all parts of the customer's journey. And I would suspect that, you and Joe would agree with this, which is you can be transformed even at the earliest stages of the buyer's journey. But even typically, you're going to be transformed toward the latter part, right? Whatever it is, the total experience is going to transform you in some possible way. And of course, there's the wonderful sort of, impact to the society, impact to culture, impact to, doing better in the world and all those kinds of things that we can talk about. But just for a moment, I'll put the marketer's lens on for a moment for transform, which is what we often talk about when we talk about content marketing at the latter part of the customer's journey, right? Where we start talking about the sales transaction, the after sales transaction, and beyond, into upsell, cross sell, evangelization, et cetera. And that transformation opportunity is we call it teaching customers how to be better customers, right? And in other words, it's in many ways our product or service is built to change. It's built to help someone change what it is they're going to do and the job that to be done, to bring in that framework, So it is built to really have people adopt it into their lives and change their lives as a result of it. And then, of course, there's probably accessories, and there's, correlative products that we want to sell them, services that we want to sell them to help them amplify that change and take that change to the next level. All of that is driven through content. Every bit of that is driven through content. And it's driven through content. It's driven through the content we put through community. It is the co-creation there. It is, all of those kinds of things. That is the power that we have if we can start to really drive valuable types of content experiences all through, and really connect them all throughout the customer's journey. So at the very first part, we understand what the transformation is we're driving to after they become customers, and we work ourselves backwards in that customer's journey. So the very front part of our thought leadership visionary blog or our visionary is teeing people up for that transformation all the way through. So often it's disconnected, right? The transformation that we have after you become a customer is like not related at all to the blog or the brand value that we have at the very top of the customer's journey. And it's connecting those things in a way that it is actually a deepening journey all the way through, so that by the time they get to that, they are teed up for that transformation. They're just ready for it, and we can deliver on it.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you a big question that's really one that I was going to ask before. I'm going to do in reverse because we're already on transformation.
Okay.
Is
Yeah.
Can artificial intelligence content help create transformation?
Maybe.
That's my answer too. I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, look, I think ultimately, I was on another podcast where somebody said that writers finally have a calculator. I think that's kind of the right metaphor, right? Which is great experiences, great content is by nature human created. I think what ends up happening is that, the way I describe it to my clients is, you have, and this comes from this, not to get too, sort of literary geeky on you, but it comes from a G.K. Chesterton critique of Dickens, where he talked about the difference between created content and constructed content. And he said, created content is that which is loved before it even exists. In other words, you love the idea, you want to express the idea. That is created content. It is an expression of one of your ideas that you love it before it even exists on paper. Constructed content can only be loved after it's created. In other words, it's that webinar abstract. It's the content that you have to construct because it needs to exist in order to, it's a stop sign, right? It's a manual, right? It's only going to be loved after it exists because it has an objective that is meant to do something like that. AI from my perspective right now, is amazing at constructed content, right? It can take an idea and make it logical, find the patterns, make it readable, do all those kinds of things. Created content is a human endeavor at this point. So, from my perspective, so can a owner's manual or can a top 10 list or can a AI created poem transform someone? I don't know. Maybe.
Interesting. We're on the same page. So what? So I think about now. I get content. People have been using this as a strategy. Like we want to automate and do these things, and they use all the personalization available to them. And by checking every box, I would see this come in and this piece of content or email. We'll say email, and I'm like, I know this was automated. There's a feeling and energy
Yeah,
to it,
that's right.
right? What
For
is that
sure.
like?
Yeah,
How do you like? To me, I can only describe it as an energy. Is like
totally.
like what's your take on that?
Yeah, totally. And by the way, I feel the same way about Mid Journey. It's like I feel like there's an energy to Mid Journey pictures that I can spot. Right.
Yeah.
I maybe I've never tested myself. Like I can't look at 1,000 images and see how many that I can spot that are Mid Journey created versus human created. But you can just kind of see it, right? You can just sort of like you look at it and go, AI created that. It's really I see a lot of that in automated content, especially in the emails that you get, or the LinkedIn DMs that you get, and all that kind of stuff. There's an energy around the the words and the way that the phrases are used, and sort of it's personal but not really personal. You know what I mean? And or as when I teach I teach a class on personalization, what I'll say is it's personalized, but it's not personal, right?
Hmm.
In other words, it's got lots of facts about you, but it's not terribly personal in the way that it's addressing you.
You know, I had a really interesting, and I don't even know how we got into this, but Susan Casey she's the one that wrote the book, The Underworld, which is it's just about going underneath in the deep ocean, and we were talking about how these animals communicate totally by only frequency because they're not seeing things at this level, and she was going, that's how she views how we as humans, as we're going to go through this revolution of artificial intelligence. She goes, I think it's going to bring up like these animals have learned in these crazy environments, the loss of the other senses and your frequency and energy is going to, your ability to sense, your sensory. And she was talking about how some of these pilot whales and great killer whales they found these ability that's beyond, it's a bigger an area for empathy, but there's something else there. And what they believe it to be is that they have a sense of like we are one, and they have the sense of energy. They can feel empathy to a level, and they know that there's a connection. And to
Mm.
give the example she gives is like this, they've figured this out because these pilot whales, one will go on the beach and they'll all beach themselves because they go, we're one, you're in pain, we're in pain. Like it's kind of like that. And when she was talking about frequency through the fact that there's a new sensory either loss or created, that frequency is one of the most powerful ways. And I'm like, I think that might be what I'm experiencing with this email. It's like some level of frequency or something. I don't know. I know I'm getting really esoteric at the end of this, but
I
I was just
know
like,
we could do a whole show on that too. I mean, getting esoteric and into energy and all that kind of stuff, that's my jam. So, and especially as it relates to storytelling and getting creative and how we connect to each other in an energetic standpoint and leverage that energy to sort of tell common stories. It's like, yeah, there's a real both. And to your exact point, both good and bad, right? Both positive and negative, right? You can have positive aspects of that. And then, as you pointed out, you can definitely have the negative aspects of that, which is it just feels like I often ask, I get these DMs from on LinkedIn, these sales messages or, emails or whatever it is. And I'm like, there's somebody out there teaching this, right? Because they're all using the exact same phraseology and they're using the same, there's someone out there. And I've never found out who it is, because I want to reach out to them and go, please stop teaching this because it's just ridiculous. But
I
somebody's
think
out
it's
there saying that this
emulation.
is a good idea.
Oh no, I
Well,
think
I
it's emulation.
agreed.
They're going, oh,
Yeah.
that must work. I'm doing it. I'm doing an iterative process, but it's a pattern that's like you see a common pattern, and it's like the
Right.
sea of sameness, right? That's the sheep kind of moving in. To
Agreed.
stand outside that is to be really authentic and go your own way. Is kind of what I tell people. It's like focus on what do you have energy for? Where are you
Yeah,
going to show up
exactly.
for it, right?
Yeah.
And I did a really interesting podcast with Guru Singh. He's a third generation yogi, and we talk about energy, universe, and nature and how it can be applied to
Mm.
marketing. That's what kind of built a portion of like how I view the work is looking at nature as a as a guide for how to create sustainable growth marketing. And we're talking about energy before. One of my beliefs is going in to create content, and maybe it applies to even a strategy. Is when you go in and going, how are we going to get customers and get attention? It's different energy and going, what are we giving? What are we showing up to make a difference? How's our energy? And even setting the stage at the creative table with a different level of intention. I believe I've been testing this, and I see the outcome of the content vastly different. And I'm curious if this is even resonating or you've seen this yourself.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly affected my work in how I think, about creating content and about the way that I, because look, we get tired of our own brand, right? As it were, right? We start creating content. We start, those of us who create content for a living, you really sort of get tired of your own stuff. And what you don't realize in so many ways is that the value that you create with your content in so many ways isn't new to you, but it is new to someone else. And so it's that classic saying of like, just because you think it's easy doesn't mean it's easy for someone else. And so sharing that idea, sharing that energy is a good thing. And as I tell clients all the time, there is magic in writing it down. There is magic in the expression of ideas, even if those ideas are well common paths. And so I'm a big believer in that everybody has the power to be great storytellers and great content creators. It's just a muscle. It's a process that you have to exercise. And so it's a very Zen idea, which is we are all masters and we are all none. We are all both, right? And so it is only about the practice.
Okay, I got two more questions for you before we wrap here. The next question I'm curious to ask you is, what is one of the biggest pitfalls when approaching your content strategy? What are one of the things that will almost get everybody, or you see as being one of the most potentially derailing challenges? And for me, mine, I'll tell you what mine is for my perspective of
Sure.
content is patience. To me, it's like my quote in my book is patience is the new growth hack, because everybody's so anxious,
Yeah. So, you mean, and so what do I see as the biggest?
What do you see? Yeah, what do you see as being one of the biggest?
I think the biggest one is, patience is certainly one of them, right? So having the patience to let things work, and the patience to let things not work for a bit. We are now trained, in terms of almost a Pavlovian way, that if it doesn't work in the first week, it's a failure, right? And so we see a lot of great content sort of eke its way out of existence because it didn't work in the first week, or we didn't promote it in the right way, and we don't try to re-promote it and all those kinds of things. So having patience and working the problem is something that I see a big challenge with. But the biggest one, honestly, is communication. That's the biggest part that I see. Everybody just assumes, right? Content is the most expensive thing that a business does. It's just by far the most expensive thing that a business does because everybody does it. Every single person in the business does it. And so, but if you ask a CFO and I say, how much did you spend on content last year? They'll laugh at you. They'll go, how do you even track that? And I'll say, let me just segment it for you. How much did you spend on marketing content last year? They don't know. There's no way to know that. It just gets wrapped up into other things. And so until we actually start to look at content as a process and as a strategic function as important as marketing or legal or sales or finance or any of those things, you're just never going to get your arms around it. And so until you create content as a strategic challenge and a strategic function in your business, that communication, that coordinated set of communication just isn't there. And it's always made so much harder than to make it work for you.
Oh, I love that. It's like, I'm like, no, and tell me if you've done this in your book or what you think about this. What if there was a content P&L statement?
Yes. And we've actually seen that and built that for companies before, where we've actually looked at a content P&L statement, more on the L than the P, to be honest, because it's really hard for those CFOs to get their head around the P part of that expense line.
Well, maybe there's a different word. Maybe it's not necessarily profit.
It could be.
Yeah.
It's basically, yeah, what we've done is we've created a balance sheet, right? For
Yeah.
it. So in other words, you look at it from, are you getting more efficient at the expense? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because for most organizations, content and marketing is still going to sit on the SG&A line, and it's still going to be an expense considered by the business, and it's not going to hit the profit part of the balance sheet. But but Cleveland Clinic is doing that. The Cleveland Clinic has definitely, they've got a whole P&L just for the content practice itself. But barring that, what we can do is you can definitely provide an accounting for content. And we did it across the biggest value we created for one organization was creating an expense line for content. And the biggest challenge was getting an apples to apples equation across the different parts of the global organization, right? What's a white paper? What is an ebook? What is an initiative versus a campaign? What is when you start having to define those terms and what the cost of each should be so that you're comparing apples to apples, where a white paper in APAC, costs you $15,000, but a white paper in Europe costs you, $22,000. Well, okay, there's a balance there. But even just knowing that is a big value, and you can save hundreds, thousands, millions of dollars by just getting your arms around the cost.
Maybe we call it the progress and loss statement. There's a P&L.
I like it. There you go.
Okay, we
I
co-created
like
that here. If you ever
Yeah.
create one, let's please share it with me, or let's maybe talk about that, because I think that's a really
Nice.
interesting.
Yeah.
Because I'm dealing with that right now, and it's like I'm like, wow, what if I actually preemptively kind of put some anticipated metrics just to kind of calm the anxiety, and just showing like anything in life, like whether you're losing weight or moving a business, as long as the owners and the C-suite sees progress, it's demonstrated. We need to be able to kind of create a mechanism for that, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
my last question is the future. So what do you see in, as far as you can see, the shifting tides of technology, AI, the shift to more culture, community and stuff? What do you see an important thing that you can point to kind of give me a sense of the future, where people can got to be, maybe it's not here today, but you can kind of sense that this is what's happening?
Another big question. You,
I
you
know.
you don't ask small questions, that's for sure. You know, I'll say with regard to AI and technology, I'll say this, which is I'm not a believer in the FUD, the fear, uncertainty, and doubt that's being spread right now that that it's going to kill all these jobs. Um, and 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 to be clear, I do believe that it's going to kill jobs. But what we have to realize is that jobs aren't people, and so jobs are activities. And so, will it make us 30% more efficient? Will it make individuals 30% more productive? 100% yes. I believe that that's true. But I don't believe in the bumper sticker that says, that if you don't learn AI, someone will replace you that knows AI, that sort of bumper stickery stuff that's going on right now. I think that's not productive, and I think it's not true. I think, in much the same way that we saw the word processor, and we saw Photoshop, and we saw digital photography, and before that we saw the typewriter, and before that we saw the printing press. Yes, it will make content creation more effective and more efficient, but it will be just exactly that. The skills, however, in the future, if your only skill that you're offering into the marketplace, and that means in your job or your in your entrepreneurship, or your agency or whatever it is, if the only skill is putting words together, well, then you're in trouble, because that's the part of the job that's going to become 30% more easier. And so you have to start to ask yourself, what else am I offering that is more strategic? Is it creative ideas? Is it strategy? Is it measurement? Is it subject matter expertise? Is it depth of knowledge? Where is my add, right? Where is my value truly? It's not just in stringing words together in grammatically correct ways. And so that becomes the challenge for us as practitioners in marketing and sales, et cetera, for the future, is finding our add, finding our value that goes beyond sort of the things that will be made more efficient by AI. I'm very hopeful for the future as it pertains to content and operating more like a media company. And in fact, I think in many ways, marketing is becoming content marketing, right? It truly is. Joe talks about experiences, and marketing is becoming well, Bill Gates 1996 wrote his essay "Content is King," and which is nice and lovely and wonderful, and everybody quotes the title, but it's the last line of that essay that is the most important to me, where he says, "In the future, the internet becomes a marketplace of ideas." And that's what I think the future really is, the opportunity for us, is to create a marketplace of ideas. That's what marketing is these days, is creating a marketplace of ideas, and the best ideas win. So ultimately, I think our value add is in the future, despite what happens with technology, is how much value can we add to the marketplace of ideas?
This might go down as one of the most masterfully, perfectly bow conversations I've had in a long time. Incredible! Thank you so much for being on the show. And
100% my pleasure. Yeah.
could you just share with everybody where they can find you and where you can get your book and so forth?
Sure. Well, the book can be found all your favorite online bookstores, all those kinds of things, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, wherever you like to buy books. You can also get links to all of that, and then all the assets to the book, because I make available a lot of frameworks, et cetera, at my new website, which is contentmarketingstrategy.com, which has our coaching stuff as well as sort of access to a lot more of the extra content from the book. And then my own consulting website is contentadvisory.net.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
And everyone, thank you again for listening. Please go to groundswell.tv. Leave me a voicemail. Go and click on the mic and let me know what you think of the show, or new ideas or questions you might have. And until next time, mahalo.